Street Photography in the New Documents of the 1960s. Robert Frank and the Americans pioneered a new photographic style which combined the unself-conscious informality of the family snapshot with the authenticity of documentary photography and the immediacy of a news picture. This style was adopted in the 1960s by other photographers. Garry Winogrand, Lee Friedlander, and Dion Arbus are three whose photographs possess a casual, offhand quality. In some cases, the subject matter was so apparently random that the public had a difficult time comprehending what the pictures were trying to say. Some critics were skeptical. Quote, "The observations of the photographers are noted as oddities in personality, situation, incident, movement, and the vagaries of chance," unquote, Jacob Deschen wrote in the New York Times Review. He could not identify the subject of documentation in any of the works on display, or any discernible point to the show. In the past, photographic practice had typically been defined by its ability to provide proof or documentation of a specific subject. Walker Evans' photographs of Southern migrant workers, for example, conveyed an almost forensic objectivity and clear-eyed purpose. Photographers were known primarily for their visual description of a particular subject, or to clearly create an artistic image. These photographers do not do that. They just present what they see or what they are interested in photographing. Garry Winogrand was born in the Bronx and became a renowned photographer of New York City and of American life from the 1950s through the early 1980s. He typically used a wide-angle lens mounted on a Leica 35mm camera and photographed prolifically. The tilted horizon and feeling of chaos in his images belie his careful compositions concerned with capturing surface detail and energy. Winogrand believed that the act of framing and photographing something transformed it. His images are often confrontational and take moments out of context, positioning Winogrand as an outside observer of human gestures and actions. He did much of his best-known work in Manhattan during the 1960s and became one of the principal voices of that eruptive decade in both the content of his photos and his artistic style. Daily life in post-war America, rich with new possibility and yet equally anxious, threatened to spin out of control. It seemed to unfold for him in a continuous stream. He photographed business moguls, everyday women on the street, famous actors and athletes, hippies, politicians, soldiers, animals in zoos, rodeos, car culture, airports, and other things. El Morocco was one of New York's hottest nightclubs in the 1950s, a perfect site to test his talents as a street-smart freelance photographer. This photo of a couple dancing explodes the idea of the snapshot. His focus on his subject's telling responses, her face and hands reveal a ferocious spirit, introduced a new, exceedingly confrontational style of 35mm photography. It is direct, invasive, yet intuitively choreographed. Photos of the Bronx Zoo and of the Coney Island Aquarium made up his first book entitled The Animals, a collection of pictures that observes the connection between humans and animals. Eileen Hale, Garry Winogrand's widow, comments on this series. "I think part of the aim was to unsettle people's ideas, whether his own or other people's, to move people out of an unquestioning space and to some less settled space in which the authority of rules and structures was broken up a bit." He does this through looking at caged animals and in some cases seeing their closeness to human responses. He frames the image so that the fences and cages are ambiguous. Are the animals the restrained specimen to watch, or are the humans? Who is on the inside of the cage and who is on the outside? Winogrand confronted tough issues like racism with a sense of humor. In this photo, taken in the Central Park Zoo, we see an African-American man and a white woman holding apes. The chimpanzees are dressed like children and resemble the human child standing behind the couple. The photographer's close vantage point, the crowd behind the couple, and the dramatic winter light all add to a sense of spectacle. There is a sense of irony in that the couple is carrying chimps through the zoo. It isn't clear whether the man and woman are actually a couple, but Winogrand must have known that their togetherness was unsettling to some people. We must remember that in 1967, the year this photo was made, was also the year that the U.S. Supreme Court overturned state laws banning interracial marriage. Winogrand is not simply reacting to a strange moment, but probably also to racial tensions sweeping the country at the height of the civil rights movement. As women's rights movement gained momentum in the 1960s, Winogrand avidly photographed women for his 1975 book, Women Are Beautiful. On his relationship to his subjects, he comments in his book, quote, "I don't know if all the women in the photographs are beautiful, but I do know that the women are beautiful in the photographs." What he means by this relates back to his idea that he photographs to see what the world looks like in photographs, that the photo is separate from the real world. It frames and captures elements in a particular manner. So his comment relates to the image, not to the inner workings of the person he is photographing. In this image, 6 young women in short dresses sit sandwiched between 2 men on a bench. One looks upset as she leans against her friend. The others seem distracted. They engage in stereotypical girlish behavior, chatting, gossiping, and flirting. Their juxtapositions invite comparisons. Their cross-legged postures and dramatic hand gestures echo one another, yet they are unique to each of them. The resulting book offers a random collection of women caught on the street, in parks, getting into cars, at parties, marching in parades, etc. The images capture the styles, activities, gestures, and energies pertaining to gender in the 1960s and 70s. In a preface to a monograph published after Winogrand's death, Museum of Modern Art curator John Zarkowski commented, quote, "Winogrand's view of women was perhaps outrageous, or was perhaps saved from outrageousness by its simplicity and openness, by its reckless enthusiasm," unquote. Winogrand was enormously prolific, but largely postponed the editing and printing of his work. The act of taking pictures was far more fulfilling to Winogrand than making prints or editing for books and exhibitions, so he often allowed others to perform these tasks for him. He died suddenly of gallbladder cancer at the age of 56 and left behind proof sheets he had marked but never printed. There were over 6,600 rolls of film, which are about 250,000 images, that he had never seen. More than a third he had never developed at all. These rolls of film were developed after his death. Lee Friedlander began photographing the American social landscape in 1948. Friedlander made humorous and poignant images among the chaos of city life, dense landscapes, and countless other subjects. He was able to organize a vast amount of visual information in dynamic compositions. He is recognized for a group of self-portraits he began in the 1960s, which were reproduced in a book entitled Self-Portrait that he turned to again and again to explore this theme in the 90s, and then he published another monograph in 2000. Friedlander's photography follows the tradition of documentary photography as practiced by Walker Evans and Robert Frank. It is unusual for street photography in that it possesses a constant awareness of the photographer's relationship to the picture plane and places at least as much importance on it as the image's ostensible subject, usually something like an empty street, a store window, or an unremarkable piece of town statuary. Friedlander's photographs also often contain his shadow or reflections, which lends an odd, uncomfortable edge to his observations. His series of self-portraits are not created in the traditional manner. He uses reflections off of plate glass windows, like this example, which combines his image with both the reflection of things that are behind him and the objects that are seen through the glass. His shadow self-portraits have both a humorous and menacing quality. To me, this work's humor comes from the texture of the fur aligning with the hair of Friedlander's shadow. The fact that he is close behind this seemingly unaware woman and is imposing himself onto her adds an ominous quality to the image. This is another shadow self-portrait in which texture is key. He also plays with vantage points and the way in which photographs create relationships between subjects in the foreground and background which did not exist before. In Friedlander's work, these can have humorous effect. It appears as if the dog has a bouffant hairdo. Or it can be an exploration of formal compositional elements, as in the way in which the street sign and the architectural pyramid in Memphis appear to echo each other and to be the same size. Friedlander worked on many different series and produced books featuring them. One of his most famous series was on monuments, how we see them and by photographing them, thinking about their relationships to their current settings. In this example, we see the irony created by a solemn figure surrounded by the chaos of modernity and popular consumer culture. Statues are prevalent in town squares, but when seen through Friedlander's lens, they create new narratives. Friedlander continues to add to these series, taking images of the ordinary and making us reflect on it and on the process of framing and making the photo. Diane Arbus was born in New York and started her career making advertising photos for her father's store. Later, she was hired to take fashion photographs for Harper's Bazaar and Esquire magazines, but her best-known works are from the 60s, often of traditionally forbidden subjects of people existing on the fringes of society: transvestites, nudists, circus performers, residents in a home for people with mental disabilities. Her daughter Dune Arbus wrote about her mother that, quote, she was determined to reveal what others had been taught to turn their backs on, unquote. She made painfully honest images by gaining the trust of her subjects. They became at ease with her presence, while she captured a world in which we are not allowed to stare. She also took the ordinary world and sees the bizarre in it. Diane Arbus took many noteworthy photographs of unusual people throughout her career, but perhaps her photograph of an awkward-looking child clutching a toy hand grenade remains her best-known work. This iconic image embodies the awkward tension between childhood tomfoolery and primal violence. America's historic transition from the complacent isolationism of the 1950s to the socio-political turmoil that would emerge in the late 1960s and 1970s seems to seethe beneath the surface of this image, underscoring Arbus's prescient and intuitive understanding of her time. These photos weren't staged, but she did shoot many other images of this child before this one. In this image, he stands stiffly, his hands clenched like claws, with a crazed expression on his face. The portrait seems sinister, yet it could reflect something more ordinary: the exasperation of a child made to stand still and have his picture taken multiple times over and over as the photographer was seeking just the right shot. Formally, this work is interesting in that the line of the boy's suspender lines up with one trunk of the tree, and the doubling of the tree trunks echoes his two legs. Also, the pattern of his shirt is similar to the dappling of light on the ground, but those formal qualities almost take a back seat to his distraught expression. We must remember that these images were taken in the Vietnam War era. She took images of people at political events. There is a certain normalcy to this figure, but if you look closely, he wears a pin that says Bomb Hanoi, which to me carries the same threat of violence, if not more so, than the boy with the toy hand grenade. Other of Arbus's works deal with conformity. Identical Twins, Roselle, New York, depicts a pair of twin girls, the Wade sisters, standing in front of a white wall on brick-paved ground in the center of the frame, looking directly to the camera. Even though the line between the ground and the wall is not perfectly horizontal, the central and symmetrical composition of the figures suggests a reasoned, deliberate photograph. It is a combination of a snapshot and set-up portrait. Photographing them in her typically straightforward manner, Arbus ensured close attention would be paid to details. The symmetry of the twin girls is broken by their dissimilar facial expressions. One twin smiles more than the other. But conformity is present. The twins have the same hairstyle, wear the same white headbands, and the same dark festive dresses with white collars and sleeves. They stand so close to each other and appear as if they share one arm. This effect of conjoined twins is also enhanced by the development method. Arbus increased the contrast in the area of their middle arm to coalesce the two figures. Such details variously belie and reinforce the uncanny suggestion of two thoroughly identical individuals. The photo also comments on a society of conformity. Why should twins dress the same when they are two unique individuals? Arbus observes that girls are expected to conform to society's expectations, and here we see a literal representation of that.